I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. And this idea that we actually benefit from the ideas of other folks who are going through similar challenges, this idea of a village, this idea, we call it a wolf pack. Who are your counterparties, whether it's someone who helps you, physically drive the kids to an after school activity, whether it's someone who watches your child while you have a job opportunity. So I do think every community has this aspect of communal support, and using the economic benefit of it makes sense to have two people work outside the house. So one of the things we know about pitches is that women, and this again is proven empirically, will take a comment and personalize it, whereas a guy will take a negative comment and attribute it to the external environment. I do think there's a lumpiness on how money gets allocated. There's fads and fashion. For example, climate is very big right now. So there's a lot of money going into climate, and it does become a little zero sum. That becomes the focus versus others.
Thanks, Monica, for joining us for this interview. We're very thrilled to hear about your story, and especially on women representation in the world of investing, because you've written a book where you speak about how women redefine and rebalance the world, how they come up with different, responsibilities and yet multitask in the most efficient manner. So, a very enthralled to know about what got you to write that book. What experiences did you encounter yourself which led you to enter that world and pen down something that the other world can see and read? So if you could just tell us about that part of the story and how you started your own career in investing.
Thanks, Radhika. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. The book was very accidental, I should say, in that, but it came out of something that was very intentional. So the intentional piece was getting together, as many leaders do, with peers that really were struggling with similar challenges. In my case, it was other new moms who were both had professional aspirations to not only work outside the house, but actually to have meaningful careers and actually have ambitions to lead companies. So the first things we had in common were that we were all professionally aspiring to grow in our careers. Two, that we were moms of toddlers at that point. We started in 2010 and all had kids below the age of 2. And three, that we actually were pursuing jobs that had meaning beyond just the bottom line. So all of us in the group, we all worked for different kinds of companies, but all of them had impact on, I guess, making the world a better place, for lack of a better phrase. And it interestingly drew from different fields. I work in impact investing. I run an impact investing fund focused on financial inclusion. Other folks were in the legal profession, media. So again, it was a very diverse group. And probably the best quote to explain sort of the power of the idea that we're trying to promote is probably Maya Angelou, who's the opening quote, and it says, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. And this idea that we actually benefit from the ideas of other folks who are going through similar challenges. And what this group did, we would meet the first Friday of every month. And basically we would pick a topic, and it could be anything from how do I help ask for a salary raise, or how do I get to the next level of a career, to how do I travel and nurse while I'm away from my child. So again, everything was on the table. And this idea of the ingenuity, the creativity, the solution orientation, again, it was not it was a very pragmatic group. And there was so much wisdom that we got from being with each other. When 2020 happened and we were in the middle of COVID and clearly we couldn't meet together anymore, we decided to write down some of those real pearls of wisdom, share our experiences, share some of the stories. So that's what the book is about. The book is about how do you really parent, lead, and also self-care so that you can thrive. And we believe that there is possibility to do it all.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, this reminds me of a post that I recently saw on LinkedIn where a woman just delivered a baby, and while at the hospital, she was working on an email to collaborate with a FMCG firm for her startup. So it just shows that how women can just co-lead everywhere, and it's not that it acts as a barrier, because a lot of time investors ask that, what if you get pregnant? Will you be able to drive the business? How will you even work without a co-founder, which is male, for example? So I'm glad that you addressed all of those stories in your book. If you could just share some instances that hit really hard and which you've penned up and down in the book.
Well, one of my favorite stories actually comes from one person who actually shared, how do you integrate these different parts of your life? So one woman actually was, again, I want to be very clear. It's a great story about the person writing an email after they gave birth. But I think the other beautiful part of the story is also enabling a different kind of ethic, meaning we know very well from science, a lot of research, that multitasking, or actually not resting, is not optimal. This idea that we have to always be on, and this idea that we're always having to be productive, or that our value is in our productivity, versus really understanding that having a balance. Even elite athletes take rests. You look at the World Cup, they're subbing people, because you can only go 120% for a certain period of time, where you have to recover and rejuvenate. So even using whatever sports metaphor, same in work, you can't always be on. And this idea of, we can be very smart about giving breaks. And so one of the stories was actually a woman who was trying to figure out how to get back on maternity leave, and so actually decided to develop the maternity leave policy. So she was actually working in a big corporation, and it was mostly in a male-dominated, was investment orientation. So it was actually mostly men. And so there wasn't really a thoughtful maternity leave policy that she helped craft, not to just, codify how many weeks off, but actually to begin thinking about flex time. How do you integrate back, where you actually build in a time where you're transitioning in, maybe you're job sharing, maybe you're actually building a way to create opportunities for others that both work for the returning mom or parent, because it should be parental leave, not just maternity leave, it's parental leave. We believe that actually fathers want the same thing that moms do. They want to actually meaningfully be engaged, but do so in a way that's flexible. Like, for example, maybe the father wants to take off a year after the baby's born, and the mom is going back to work. There's a lot of ways, very that can be accommodated, that actually bring a lot of satisfaction and reward to both employees, while being a benefit to the employer as well. So in that example, this mom actually helped craft the policy, and do so in a way that actually gave opportunity for some of the fathers in the company to take off that they never felt comfortable voicing, that they actually wanted to also take time to spend with their child. It was actually, the woman almost gave her permission to bring up this need, which she needed to physically. She couldn't physically get back to the office given the demands of a newborn, but actually wanted very desperately to go back to work. So just a great example of both creating an institutional policy, giving that actually benefits not just the woman coming back, but all the employees.
Yeah, reading such stories definitely, injects a sense of spirit inside you and makes you excited for the times ahead, and not makes you scared, because the society will always throw pressure on you and tell you, okay, you can't do this, you can't do that. But reading stories like this, definitely install some kind of motivation in your mind to just get going. So I would recommend this book to everyone. But what was the triggering point when you decided to write the book? Because you've been into this career for a long time, and you could have done that earlier also, but why now? Why did you decide to do it and publish it in this year?
COVID was a big reset. So I think COVID, one, giving us the time at home. So for my job, I do international investing. And so I wasn't traveling. So all of a sudden, all that time you spend on planes and going to the airports and going through security, I got back. So part of it was just the time, but more important than that physical time was just the reflection. I think COVID really helped us re-examine flex time. Let's give a very basic example. This whole notion that you have to be physically present. And again, I don't want to minimize how important it is to be physically present. We do have an office at Quona, but it also really opened up the possibility that actually virtual interaction can be a substitute. You don't have to be physically present Monday through Friday. You actually can really have and that opens up, like I was able to feel so blessed. I was able to spend time with my children who were at that point at middle school, very awkward age, and to be able to be there when, someone didn't, ask you to sit together at lunch, or when you go through that difficult moment at school. This idea of really being present and actually also being present at work. So COVID opened up a whole new set of possibilities that, everyone just took for granted, that you have to be in the job 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So I think it created a new reality. It gave us time to pause and reflect, but also, and this is as important, it gave us really a global perspective. Like, if we don't pay attention to what's happening in other parts of the world, and really, whether it's, infectious diseases or even how we treat each other, it matters, right? This notion that we have to pay attention to these calling social issues. So for me, it was really inspiration, saying, you know what, too many people ask me for informational interviews. I want to be able to share the wisdom I received as broadly as possible. So it really was a goal to share in an efficient way.
Understood. And while growing up, how difficult was it for you to, keep going in what you were doing? Because a lot of times, family, maybe if they're not as supportive, they ask you to get married or have kids. Or if you don't have a supportive husband, he might just ask you to stay back home and take care of your children. I mean, that's the reality in most of the countries, and women face that, because of which they can't pursue their ambitions. But how was it for you growing up? How was it in your career? How smooth was it for you? Or what kind of challenges did you encounter smartly, and that's why you are where you are today?
Radhika, it's a beautiful question, and it also reminds me how, again, lucky I am. So I am biracial. I'm Latina. So my mom was born in Peru. My first language was Spanish. Most of my family on my mom's side is still in Latin America. And I didn't have role models. My mom didn't go to college. My aunts, most of them worked from home. They raised kids. And so this idea of having a role, I didn't have a role model. And I was very lucky, though, because I was in the United States, where I think one, just the economic reality, most households cannot survive on one income. So there's an economic reality, and that is where I would start, with people in cultures where maybe it's not as accepted as it is in the United States for both partners to work, both spouses to work. I would start with the economic reality. In many, many countries, it is required to have two breadwinners, to have two. So the idea that there's a practical reality. The second is, and this is true, remember, in all of history, all over the world, villages raise children, not one person. If you think of whether you're talking about tribes in Africa or even extended families, when immigrants came to the United States, there was not, the woman was actually helping the husband in the shop, whether they were taking orders, whether they were, sweeping up. The woman was not alone in the house. And the way you managed was you had an extended family who helped. So maybe in the United States, for example, you don't have an extended family that all lives together, but you created a community. And we talk about this in the book, this idea of a village, this idea, we call it a wolf pack. Who are your counterparties, whether it's someone who helps you, physically drive the kids to an after-school activity, whether it's someone who watches your child while you have a job opportunity. So I do think every community has this aspect of communal support, and using the economic benefit of it makes sense to have two people work outside the house. In addition to what it does, I really do believe working, if you look at longevity, which are the countries where people live the longest, is when someone is doing something. Whether, again, I don't want to tie this idea of to be productive, to be valuable, but this idea of being engaged, doing something meaningful. Again, whether, whatever it earns income wise, I really think there's a lot of logic and evidence that says that's where happiness comes from, that's where fulfillment comes from. And the most important lie I want to change is that actually where great kids from. My kids have lived all over the world. They're thriving at school. And I am not my husband actually is the lead parent, not me. And I think there's new models that really break apart, that somehow your kids will suffer if the woman works. That's a lie. Kids will not suffer. Kids suffer when they are not given independence and shown great role models. You want to be a model, not a martyr. That's a very important statement, that women should really question the guilt they're made to feel. The guilt, so the most important thing about this book is to give voice to truth. And the truth is, there are some women who love being at home, and that we don't want to demonize women who want to be at home, but there's some women who want to be out in the workforce. And we should, as a society, embrace that and figure out, in companies, as a society, how do we support that? Because it's benefits all of us.
Yeah. And I'm sure that, having such a supportive family definitely helps. And I hope more and more societies adopt to this kind of, mindset, that it's okay for a husband also to take care of the home and not always go to work. And there is actually a concept of house husbands flourishing all across, and people are just happy living with it. So I'm very, glad that you are speaking about this and we are witnessing a change. But what's the case with lesser women representation in the world of investing, especially because we see so many women employed in different fronts like fashion, makeup, beauty, cosmetics. We see a lot of entrepreneurs also emerging there. But when it comes to investing, there are very few. I mean, you can count on your fingers, and you can see that there are no women role models also as such when you are joined as a fresher in a investing firm. So, what is it really that doesn't let women flourish in that space? Is it too aggressive for them, or is it too male dominated for them to thrive? What is it?
It's a great question, and I do think it's a little bit of the like beget like. So what you need to have, and again, it's growing, right? So the one thing I would say is that the trends are positive. There are more women than there were when I was growing up, so that's one positive thing. It does take time, and the reason why, especially in early stage growth equity, which is where I'm in, it really is apprenticeship. It's not like you can't go to school to learn venture capital. There are courses, but the real learning is on the job and by doing. And when you look at who recruits, even Quona's own experience, when we go out and look for a job, overwhelmingly the candidates, the CVs we get are from men. And that's just because, again, where we draw from, if you have investment banking, all the sort of likely careers that often attract people in equity investing come from other male-dominated areas. And so part of it is just a process of being very conscious and consciously and intentionally looking outside of your immediate network, thinking about what are the competencies rather than looking for, oh, I need someone who has investment banking. What I need is someone who can model, someone who has analytical. And that might come from investment banking, but you can have other fields where that comes from. So I think also really focusing on competencies versus focusing on specific job experiences, which may or may not, again, draw from similar pools. So I think it's a process. I think it's being intentional. And I think it is opening up networks. I think it really is, like, for example, I participate in a number, like, for example, Women Investing in Africa. There's also LAVCA, which is the Latin America Forum. There are forums that I invest in that really are trying to open up their doors to more diverse voices. And that, again, it's a process, but I really think it's important that everyone take it on themselves. Every time you fill a job, you have a choice. And I think having that, at least, for example, having the two finalists, making sure that you don't go through the process with at least making sure there's diverse candidates, even if you end up at the end choosing a non-diverse candidate. I think it's important to really open up the field.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm sure that funds like yourself, which are led by women, will open more doors to other women, because by nature, men and women are made different and their qualities are inherently different. Like, women are more purpose driven, and I'm sure that since you're into the impact investing space, you'll see more women led applications there rather than more women in tech. And that's also a question, that how we need to educate more women in STEM so that more tech businesses can emerge, since they are the most fast growing ones and can derive great economic value for founders and investors both. But speaking of that, how is it that you receive pitches from women? How is it different from the way men pitch? Because women generally tend to speak about only the things that they have at hand and sometimes lose out on the bigger picture, which makes investors a bit jittery of investing into their businesses. So how do you evaluate as an investor?
Great question. And I want to tie that question to the one you just said, which is I really think it's important that both men and women see as their job mentoring. The most important thing, in fact, a very powerful source. And you asked me personally, like, I was raised by my dad. I lost my mom when I was very young. And I think having men role models who really help you, for example, even pitch in a different way. So, for example, I am very comfortable in public speaking. I am very intentional not to have an inflection at the end of my voice when I speak, which many women do. Don't you understand? And it actually might create doubt, whereas I think women do it to be inviting. I think the inflection that often permeates how women speak, and there's, again, Deborah Taneman, there's authors who have actually studied women and men's speech patterns. And there are patterns, right? And I think they get adopted and replicated. And again, I think one, reevaluating that question at the end of a woman's voice is not doubt or self-doubt. It's an invitation to say, hey, here's a question. It actually invites you to engage versus like a one-upmanship kind of relation. So one is reinterpreting, what does that inflection mean? One, noticing that, I might be making a judgment subconsciously that I don't even realize. Two, how can I reinterpret what that question is? Maybe she really does know what she's talking about and she just wants to engage me versus, oh, she has doubt or she's unsure, right? So I think this notion of really, and then three, making sure that I speak in a way that actually is equally inviting. So one of the things we know about pitches is that women, and this again is proven empirically, will take a comment and personalize it, whereas a guy will take a negative comment and attribute it to the external environment, right? Like, oh, they must be negative because they're negative on my market, not my business. Whereas a woman might say, oh, they must not like me, right? So again, I think there's another role that women have to say, internalizing messages the right way versus saying, hey, it might be that he doesn't like me, or maybe he just is tired or saw a business like me that also he lost money on, right? So again, I think there's a real opportunity to get very in touch with what is my reaction right now? What is happening to me? What am I interpreting? Is the story I'm receiving the truth? Or maybe it's just a narrative that I need to explore and really test out. So I think until both sides really begin analyzing what's happening in this conversation, are we really speaking the same way? Are we meeting? Or maybe we're walking away with very different understandings. We both need to really understand that for pitches to be successful. So what that means practically, I coach women on pitching and, sort of say to them, make sure that you talk about addressable market as well as your role. Make sure you talk about the macro, the vision, as well as what's going to happen next year, right? So again, things that maybe a male CEO might do naturally, right? And whereas a woman might just focus on the data of what they've specifically, the KPIs they've focused on right now. So again, it's partly a pitch coaching. I also talk to investors to say, hey, pay attention to some reactions you might be having that actually might make you miss out on opportunities. So again, I think it's a multifaceted approach, and it's understanding another very important thing, Radhika. I don't demonize people. I don't say, oh, what a sexist person for him to reject that business. I really get curious, like, how did I have such a different reaction and you didn't like that business and I did? Like, I think it's an opportunity for curiosity, an opportunity for learning. Again, it's not wrong or right. It really is, sort of different perspectives, different experiences might lead you to different conclusions, and really opening up more possibilities rather than saying one is right, one is wrong, or putting any kind of label on it.
Right. Yeah. I didn't know that there are actually studies that prove different speech patterns for both men and women. But why do you think women tend to internalize the messages and try to take the blame on themselves rather than smartly answering it? I mean, what's really the case?
No, that's a great, and again, I get happy. So it was a great study actually done by Harvard Business School. I mean, I'll send it to you. Harvard Business School did a study where literally, just to give you the facts, they did, I think at 34, a number of pitches. The narrative was the same, and the only change they did was they voiced over with a man's voice and a voiced over with a woman's voice. And what was so scary, and again, Radhika, I really share this, and I hope you share this with your listeners, because one, not only did the male pitches get approved for investment, I think it's 2-1 to the women. What was scarier was that women investors, not the pitcher, the investors, were as likely to make that biased response as were the men. So what it's saying is, it's not sexist. It actually is something that we have internalized. So it's very important to really explore. The author I mentioned was Deborah Tanneman. She wrote a book called You Just Don't Understand. She's written many others after that. So analyzing women and male speech patterns and how different they are, and what we interpret from that is also very, very important. But you asked an important question on the receiving side, on the entrepreneurial side. And why do we internalize? And there's another excellent study that I'm happy to share you as well, where they interview CEOs, or I'm sorry, they're not just CEOs, but they're senior management in Fortune 500 companies. And they asked them 2 very simple questions. Did you achieve your results last year? How successful were you? And they had to rate themselves. And the second question was, to the extent you didn't achieve your goals, you weren't as successful as you thought you were, how much of that lack of success would you attribute to your personal failings versus the macro environment? Amazingly, and again, I'll share the study with you, women managers are more likely to evaluate reality as less successful than men. They're literally, again, and maybe they looked at a specific KPI, versus, contextualizing. So one is they're more likely to take a more conservative or, I won't say negative, a more conservative view of what success is, a more literal view. Maybe it's a better way of describing it. And more disturbingly, but more just, again, reality is that they're more likely to attribute their own failings to the cause of that lack of success. And again, I'm not an anthropologist. Is that socialization? Is it how you're wired? I think it's multiple factors. And again, rather than trying to understand why does it happen, let's just unpack it. Let's say, okay, how do I evaluate success? And how do we harmonize so that we're using the same criteria? So that we're saying, okay, let's evaluate whether it's specific KPIs. Let's evaluate whether it's employee morale. Evaluate whether it's the business positioning. Like I can see a lot of intangibles why a man might say we're successful or view the same data in a different way than a woman might. And on the personal front, I would really encourage women to, one, take a more holistic view. I would say really giving voice to saying, hey, I don't think that went very well, and say it out loud and hear from other people. Like, actually, I thought that went super well. I thought that was really a great progress, so, because I think once you get more data points, getting outside your head and into conversation. So I'm really trying to encourage people with the book to vocalize what you're thinking and feeling in a professional way. And if it's a sensitive topic, in a discreet way, because I think once you vocalize it, your assumptions and your way you print reality get challenged. Like, oh, maybe that was more successful. Maybe I'm doing better. This whole imposter syndrome that so many women suffer, saying, actually, maybe I am actually do pretty well. Maybe I am okay. I do think everyone has imposter syndrome, men and women, and I think they just live it differently. So I think really beginning to question, again, not saying that you're not, I don't want to be very careful too. I don't like the idea of glossing over errors or glossing over incompetencies and growth. I think women, one of the first messages we send in the book is master your trade, put your head down, work hard, find out who's great at what you do, and be great at what you do. So no, kind of like, oh, do I feel good? I mean, really produce and add value. And then talk to people, really begin saying, and I think the way you might position and view yourself might actually be much harsher than the outside world views you. So again, it's a dialogue, it's a process. And I think it starts with not blaming anyone. If you're not happy where you are, look inside, understand and articulate, wait, I actually think I should be further, and figure out, well, why aren't you there? Is it because someone is keeping you down, or maybe you haven't communicated well what you want and what you've accomplished? So again, really looking at it as almost getting curious as a puzzle rather than getting angry or blaming someone. I think that's the more we can use this approach, curiosity, I think we get a lot further.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think positive outcomes will come out of it, because negative thinking will only occupy your mind and won't let you focus on your strengths. But I sense that you can be a quite great mentor also for entrepreneurs, of course, to the portfolio founders, which you have invested in. You guide them as to how they can change their pitch and improve. But for the others who would want to learn as women entrepreneurs, do they get to learn from you? Otherwise, are you a part of any associations where you provide this learning?
That's a great question. So I will say, for example, I'm part of Money 2020 had this effort called Rise Up, where you serve as mentor to certain women. There's the networks I'm in, like Women Investing in Africa, Latin American Venture Capital Association. There's a bunch of other. There's another group. It's called She Leads. It's actually in the United States, actually focusing on Latino women, getting them on boards. So there's a number of efforts I do personally. I will say it's a fraction. I would say I probably get more requests than I'm able to service. Again, why I look for like podcasts like this to be able to get the message out more broadly versus bilaterally one-to-one. I think there, maybe post Quona, one thing I would love to do. I think it's so important to have mentors, and I would just really encourage, everyone, the male and female listeners of this, to really carve out time. I think there's no difference between that hand-holding that happens. So yes, I'm always looking for opportunities. I will say it's hard being a mom to do as much as I'd like. So it's a balance.
Yeah, indeed. But do you think that forums which promote women entrepreneurship can also be a startup in that sense? Because a lot of people just chase money. I mean, it's a capitalist world and we can't deny that. And people only see money in tech, and that's where most of the businesses are growing. But on the social side of things, most of the people do want to do certain things and create an impact, especially for women, but they don't see a lot of investors flocking in to support that kind of cause. So since you're into the impact investing space, that's the question for you, that how can associations or maybe startups which only come in to support women entrepreneurs and build different kind of services get funding for themselves and grow at a level that they wish to?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I do think there's a lumpiness on how money gets allocated. There's fads and fashion. For example, climate is very big right now, so there's a lot of money going into climate, and it does become a little zero sum. That becomes the focus versus others. And I would say a couple of things. One is I think what's exciting about impact investing is that even mainstream houses. So we have investment banks like Julius Baer or Goldman Sachs, like very mainstream houses, are beginning to develop product to actually channel resources more effectively. So there are people who really care about specific topics, whether it's gender or health or financial inclusion or climate. So some of these mainstream houses are beginning to allocate capital. So one thing I would say is there is capital out there for your interest. You just have to find it. It's a big matching game. So one is, trying to find those pockets of interest, and increasingly they are found through professional organizations, associations, groups like the GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network. There's other, again, I think resources and associations that help channel. It doesn't change the fact that, again, money is lumpy. So it's not like there's equal amount of money for certain topics than there are for others. So there, again, it is really just beginning to really hone your pitch. I think what's amazing about entrepreneurship and startups and entrepreneurs is that they can really, through a compelling vision and through traction in their company, help redirect capital. So we see that in financial inclusion. Emerging market fintech, when we started, was not a popular topic. No one woke up and saying, oh, that's what I want to change the world. I'm going to go invest in a fintech fund in emerging markets. And I think actually we showed how consequential that could be, how much leverage you could get, not just in terms of financial return, but also in terms of local impact. So partly I would say to entrepreneurs, demonstrate with results and really hone your pitch. And both of those help. And then the last thing I would say is just it's don't give up. I mean, money moves slowly at times. And so just continuing to get the word out, it does find its way. I believe market's clear. It just takes more time than I'd like sometimes.
Understood. And in impact investing, there is different ways to measure impact. There's been a debate which has been going for long enough, that how do you really measure impact, be it in climate or social entrepreneurship or governance for that matter. So how is it that you evaluate impact in the companies that you would want to invest in? For example, if in year one they're making X amount of revenues, how much would you want them to grow in terms of revenues and the impact also in the second year? How do you calculate all of it?
Yeah, so we do have a very sort of intentional approach with measuring impact. It's for us, it's a binary decision. Either the company is radically improving access and quality to financial services to the underserved, or they're not. And if they're not, we don't look at it. So one, it's in the screening, but in the measuring, we have both qualitative and quantitative metrics that we use. We have a framework that we develop with other fintech investors so that we could be able to compare Quona's impact to other fintech investors. And they're along 3 dimensions. Access is the first dimension, which is what percentage of your customers are underserved. And we use demographic data and data specific to that market to measure the percentage underserved. The second is quality. So it's not just how many people are receiving the service, but what kind of service are they receiving? How affordable is it? How quickly do they get that service? Is it one product, a mono product, or is it breadth of financial products? NPS scores. All of these are measures of quality, and the specific metrics we will use to evaluate that company are business model specific, but that's the second bucket. And the third is markets. So access quality markets. And the third bucket really is, how are you influencing the ecosystem? For example, are you attracting replications or copycats that allow more choice to the consumer? Are you employing people? Are you attracting more capital to that local market? So the markets factor is the most indirect, but all three are part of the evaluation. And we do a quantitative score in the beginning, and we evaluate it with each follow-on. So there's not, just like with financial, that's not saying if you don't hit this IRR, there's no hurdle per se, but we do want to see meaningful progress, both on the financial performance as well as on the impact performance. And we evaluate that both at the beginning and at exit.
Understood. And how do you measure the impact of governance? Because when we speak of ESG, sometimes the G part goes missing and people really don't know how to abide by that. And that is also one of the reasons why some of the startups fail and don't turn up the way they wish to. So how do you keep that checks and balances in place for governance in your portfolio companies?
Yeah, so another good question, and I want to first answer it by making sure people understand the difference between impact and ESG. So impact are goals that we set with very specific intentions that we proactively measure. So it's a forward-looking, aspirational target that we set, and we measure. ESG for us is more like a risk mitigation. It's almost, I call it corporate hygiene, and for us, what makes good companies. So, for example, the G, which I think is critical and a very big part of what Quona tries to formalize governance, it is about creating proper kind of controls, proper oversight, proper monitoring. So again, for us, it is about professionalizing or growing up as an institution. So whereas a startup might not even have a board, by the time we invest, there is a board. Oftentimes, by the progression of maybe Series B or Series C, the follow-on investments will have independent directors as well as investor directors. So again, you just start formalizing and professionalizing. There might be, for example, if you're a balance sheet business, you might have a finance and risk committee that evaluates, liquidity and asset liability matching. So again, these are all part of being, I call it a grown-up organization that's ready for prime time. So all of this, it's not just risk mitigants. It's what later stage investors, if you really want to have a successful exit and a successful follow-on investment, growth capital is going to require this. So for me, it's just, again, part of maturing, growing up as an organization. And again, we try to help the company along and do whatever is stage appropriate in terms of governance. The others, E and S. S, again, we very much believe having diverse employees, diverse companies, diverse management, create a more effective organization, having, sort of policies in place that ensure worker safety, or, again, it's just, again, part of not only legally being, following the letter of the law, but also creating, great workplaces. When people feel safe, they feel able to create, able to be creative, able to contribute. So again, a lot of, linkages between safety, psychological and otherwise, and physical safety, and your contribution as an employee. And the environmental, again, I think that, again, we're seeing in the world that we all have to be environmental stewards. The planet will not tolerate anything less.
Yeah, that's right. But any stories do you have, since you've been into investing for long, where you've seen a company with great resources, great team capital, but they just couldn't perform well in the market, something just went wrong? How did you, navigate through that kind of a company in your experience?
We have had companies, and I'll just give a current one that actually just got sold. It was called Zona, phenomenal company, did cash in, cash out, really strong technology, had attracted investors from global investors as well as local regional investors. And it happened to pick a market where commercialized Zambia that was probably the wrong market to start in. It was the wrong market because it was too small. But also because there was what I describe as destructive competition. Some of the mobile network operators came in and started offering free services, free remittances, free money transfers. And they did it because they were just trying to take customers away. They saw this fintech as a potential threat. So they basically undermined it by subsidizing product basically to put our company out of business. And it was just such an interesting learning. And for me, I learned two things. One is pick your market intelligently, pick markets that have large addressable markets that you can meaningfully grow in. Two, pay attention to the ecosystem, meaning had we approached, and we did approach these mobile network operators to see, because they actually spent more killing us than they would have to acquire us, right? So, thinking about how can you really think about what's in it for them. So thinking about the ecosystem, not just in terms of a threat, but also a potential opportunity, and reframing that maybe we might have had a different outcome. But three, the also notion of, and this is a positive learning, we stood by during the workout when things, when there was, when we had to wind down the company as strongly as we did when we were in growth. And I think that really helped our reputation globally, not just in Africa, is very strong because people see it's easy to kind of run away when things get hard. And I think a true test of character is how someone shows up when things are difficult. So I think, again, lots of good learnings. And we learn as much from our failures as we do from our successes.
Right. But what is it really that you look at in the founder's pitch in the first few minutes? Because that's when the impression is created and you make up your mind whether you want to proceed ahead or no. And most of the investors tell me that they just make up their mind in the first 10 seconds after hearing first few sentences only. So as an investor, I'd love to, ask you this for the founders who are hearing that, what would you look at if they are pitching to you as a fintech founder?
I don't think it is true. We have first impressions are strong and powerful. So I don't want to minimize that. I don't think it's true at Quona that we make a decision in the first 10 seconds. I think we're very nerdy. We're very data driven. We look at KPIs. One of our value propositions is that because we just do fintech in emerging markets, one of the benefits we bring is that we can look at similar models in other markets, and actually have data, key performance indicators that we can use to measure how successful this new pitch that we're listening to is. So I think it allows us to go more, because again, sometimes English is not the person's first language. I think, again, it would be, I think we would miss a lot. There would be a lot of false negatives. If we just focus on that first 10 seconds, we would miss a lot. So what we're really looking for is product market fit, really understanding, do you have a clear understanding of the pain point you're solving? What's the pain point? How big is that problem? How well suited, how defensible is the solution you have developed? How defensible is it in solving that particular problem? Those are some, and then on the speaker side, are you able to articulate clearly what's your right to win? What's your right to win, and why should we back you? So there are a lot of things that we look at that are not just, again, single dimension, distilled down in the first 10 seconds. It's more multifaceted. But I will say, within the first couple of pitches, if they can't explain clearly, we're not going to spend more time. So it is, again, there isn't like we're going to, do a treasure hunt to try to find what's special about this business. You need to be able to communicate. There's a lot of great companies out there. And so there's just the time. Unfortunately, time is zero sum. So every time we listen to a pitch, sometime we're not listening to another.
Yeah, I mean, what you show to the world sees. Otherwise, for them, it's hidden. Nobody's really going to dig deeper and see what you've got outside of what you say. But speaking on that, what were some of those pitches which really blew your mind in the first time itself when you heard the founders speak about their vision? If you could just take some examples and talk about that.
Sure. Maybe I'll take another, one in Africa, Yoko, which is a great company. It's on its Series C. And really, a couple of things that really compelled us. We led the Series A, almost 6 years ago. A few things. One is it was a diverse team that actually had worked in different parts of the industry. So they had worked in private equity. They had worked in the tech industry, and they really understood the landscape. So they could really paint this digitization journey, what was happening, not just in Africa, but across the world, where people were moving from cash and very paper and people-intensive ways of working to digital ways of working. So one, showing that journey and being able to articulate that's not automatic. It is a journey, with both consumers needing to change their behavior and using, again, digital forms of payment, but also on the acceptance side, businesses saying, I'm going to accept digital payments, and understanding that was a journey. Meaning, why isn't Visa and MasterCard accepted at every small business? And really understanding that the economics don't work for a small business, that the same motivations for a large business don't exist in a small business. In addition to the economics, the process is very difficult. There might be digital literacy issues. So the vision of not only being able to say, here's the North Star we want to get to in this digital Africa, but also very articulately be able to say, and here's why we have not been able to go along that journey. Here's where people fall off. And then really compellingly say, our solution really builds on not only learnings from the West, like companies like Square in the United States or Adyen in Amsterdam, but also success stories in Brazil, like PagSeguro, which basically is another merchant acquirer that really helped unlock the digitization of Brazil 5 years ago. So being able to draw on examples from developed world, from developing world, being able to create analogs of what was happening in Africa, contextualizing and doing it in such a seamless, elegant way, really brought, we were very compelled by what their vision they were unlocking, and just their ability to execute, which is another thing that's very important. So it's not just the vision that someone communicates to you, but really convincing you that they can deliver and they can execute really well, that they can pivot when things go differently than you expect. Again, and it's just been a phenomenal journey that really was articulated from day one.
Yeah, the more and more you speak about how founders should explain their pitch, it brings to the light the fact that how much articulated you need to be as a founder to explain everything that you're doing. Because a lot of times founders do so much and create such a great impact, but they're just not able to speak when it comes to crisply explaining about what they do. So I think that art of short storytelling is something that really needs to be taught right from the inception itself.
Radhika, beautiful site. Storytelling is a unsung skill, and it is a skill, and it's incredibly important.
Yeah, it is indeed. But what are the some of red flags that you see in a company which just doesn't sit well with you, and you feel that it's time to just change the course and set the right track? Because if it doesn't happen, it will just fail.
A few things. One is when we hear different information being presented to different people, this idea that, so I believe in storytelling, but when data changes, meaning what's the revenue, what's the traction, that is a red flag saying, either do they have a good handle on their data? So either they are, not really facile with their own numbers, which is a red flag, or they kind of are shifty in terms of like, kind of massaging the truth. This whole idea of alternative facts, and now it's become kind of a joke, but that matters. We do believe in kind of one truth and actually having KPIs. We're pretty technical, so that's a red flag. The other one, I'll be very honest, and I share this with people because it also maybe coming full circle on how do I do this as a mom. I think almost without exception, every entrepreneur I back, COVID was an exception because clearly we weren't able to be physical together. My family has met. Like we moved actually to Egypt earlier this year as a family because we had made 2 investments in Egypt. And this notion of, family members, especially people who are not in the field. Like my husband does technology, so he's more facile than my kids who obviously don't know that much about fintech, but they can tell you a lot about character, right? This person of, everything from do they ask them questions versus just talking all night? Do they listen? Do they have, full stories? I think kids are an amazing judge of character. So that's kind of my acid test. And I also do it so my family knows that both my entrepreneurs know this is important to me. So I'm inviting you because this is something incredibly important to me and sacred to me, just the way you've invited me into your business, which I know is important and sacred to you. It's a way to kind of create some reciprocity and some mutuality, but also a great way to assess character. So again, I don't think luckily none of my entrepreneurs have my kids, sort of objected to, but I think it does speak to being a very good arbiter of character.
Yeah, any day character trumps over talent. And I had heard Elon Musk also say in one of his interviews that he used to see brain over heart, and that really didn't work out for him. And he kept making that mistake over and over again, only to realize that it's the heart of the people that he now looks at while hiring, because those are the loyalists that will stay with you forever. And even if they're slow, it's just fine. They will learn on the go rather than having fast movers who come and change the culture differently and just destroy the employee bonding and the trust in the firm.
Exactly. 100.
Yeah. Yeah, but we're speaking a lot about fintech. I forgot to ask you about this, that what got you to focus only on fintech as an industry? There are so many other growing spaces also, like consumer tech, ed tech, health tech. Why only fintech, and what drives you in that space?
So fintech, I've spent my entire career in financial services, and I was lucky enough to have my formative professional years in Silicon Valley. So part of it was just kind of, financial services for me was a great way of marrying my left brain and my right brain. I'm left brain oriented in that, math always came easy to me. Quantitative skills were my strength at school, but actually where my passions are more the right brain, the creative side, behavioral piece, people. I'm very, very relational. And so this idea, it was a beautiful way of marrying my own personal interests and passions. As importantly, I saw, and this was again my experience in Silicon Valley, I've just never seen any tool more powerfully and more quickly be able to make change. So, there's a expression that someone who's a mentor to me said, we can't be patient with poverty. And if we really want to, and also if we want to unlock the world's capital markets, we really need to think about business models that very quickly create change and create value. So fintech for me it's certainly not exclusive, and maybe Quona will go into other areas. We already are with our embedded finance, going into adjacent spaces like health, like education, like agri. But the reason we started in fintech was it's a very powerful lever to both get financial return, which we as fiduciaries deliver to our investors, our LPs, but also to make meaningful impact in people's lives, both at the micro level, at the household level, as well as the macro level. So again, for us, it's just a very powerful tool. And we like results quickly. So that's the main reason why.
And what kind of innovative models are you seeing in fintech, which makes you wake up every day and still stay bullish on the sector?
We invest in across a number of verticals. So we have sort of certainly both small business lending and consumer finance. So again, getting financial services in the hands of both small businesses and consumers so they can transact, create opportunities, educate their kids. So again, different lending models and digital banking models. There are a lot in the payment space. So I mentioned merchant acceptance, what Yoko does, but there's also payment orchestration, cross-border payments. We have a company, for example, in London that does, it's called Verto FX, and it basically solves the pain point of businesses that are trading cross-border. So again, a lot of payments companies, again, you can see the engines of growth, which are commerce. So a lot of these businesses are creating commerce, both commercial activities at the household level and at the micro economy. And then lastly, again, not lastly, but another area is insurance, insurtech. So how do you begin digitizing risk management? And again, a lot of innovation there. We have a health insurer in Thailand called Sunday that, again, is really helping expand the insurance pool for underserved folks. Personal financial management. So that's more on the education side. How do we create tools for people to save other than just in kind of normal sort of traditional savings account, which can be not very lucrative. Those usually earn very, very small percentages. So the idea of safely allowing people to invest in stock markets and mutual funds in things that typically have only been available to the wealthy. So again, you can see that those are just some examples, the really breadth of traditional fintech models. Maybe another thing I will say that we're super excited about is what we call embedded finance. And embedded finance or use case finance is where the core business actually is not financial services. For example, we have a company in Kenya called Wasoko, very similar to a company in Indonesia called Ula, which is modeled after Udaan in India, which is basically B2B e-commerce. But in this case, they're really focusing on the small merchants, the mom and pop merchants, and using mobile to really revolutionize how they're able to order and fulfill. And embedding financial services like working capital or payments into these models that are adjacent to financial services is a very powerful way to both really have an impact as well as open up new sectors. So embedded finance is probably our fastest growing sector. And we've been pairing financial services with e-commerce, logistics, HR as a service, so there's a lot of adjacent areas that really help where financial services can be a real catalyst.
Got it. And since we're speaking of fintech, how much of women representation do you see here? Since we spoke earlier of the fact that women don't really choose the tech sector for themselves, as they find it challenging for numerous reasons, but how many applications do you receive from female entrepreneurs vis-a-vis a male entrepreneur in fintech?
Not enough. I would say still very vastly more men than women, but it's changing. I actually just this morning had a conversation with a great payment orchestration company in South Africa, where a woman was the co-founder. I just made an investment earlier this year in a supply chain finance company called Twinco, two female co-founders. Again, phenomenal company. Again, basically doing purchase order financing. So again, very important breakdown in the supply chain finance space. So again, we increasingly are seeing women in our portfolio. We want to see more. So always, really call out to get female entrepreneurs, to pursue STEM, to go into accelerators, and we'd love to see more women pitches.
Yeah, but how did this name Quona come up while you were building a fund? And my follow on to that is that when you built the fund 10 years ago, there was not much activity happening in the space like you talked about earlier. So, how was it to build a fund, get LPs, and convince them that, okay, you'll give them great returns and give them back their money after, so and so years?
Yeah. So Quona is a made-up word that means something in every region where we operate. So in Swahili, Quona means to see. Actually, I think in Hindi it means literally corner where rows cross. Quo
Okay.
is a word. It's an adverb in Latin, and more than the literal translation, the idea that it had significance in each of our markets was a powerful metaphor because we're trying to connect things that have previously been disconnected: profits and purpose, developed markets, emerging markets, financial services and technology. These things have not normally been married, and we're trying to really bring the marriage of foreign ideas because we think the integration is very powerful. So that's where the name came from. It was also a 5-letter URL that was available, so we like that. So it's become meaningful to us over time. And how we've done the journey, I would say, again, it's very much about bringing in partners. So Acción, which was an organization where I worked beforehand, it actually had the predecessor fund. It had a fintech fund that actually was operating off of its balance sheet. It was a sponsor of Quona's initial fund, and that brought not only capital and resources, but actually credibility, because Acción had been in the market for many decades. And so some very big institutions like MasterCard and Credit Suisse and insurance companies actually came in knowing that there was an entity that had 60 years in the making, had a global ran global financial institutions that were regulated, across the world, that brought comfort to our investors. So we really got very fortunate in the first fund. In addition to having, I brought on two partners, both Jonathan and Ganesh, who had experience both on the entrepreneurial side. They had helped start, scale, and exit venture-backed tech startups, as well as on the financial service, the microfinance side. So I think both of those, the combination of team, the right sponsors, and I will lastly say, we hit the market, this thesis around fintech for inclusion, hit the market just as fintech was blossoming. So we got very fortunate that we picked a theme and a thesis that really resonated with the market. And so all of those things is like this perfect storm, this alignment of multiple factors that really allowed us to be quite successful in fundraising.
Understood. And do you operate on this structure of 2 and 20? Because a lot of funds are coming up with emerging ways of giving returns to their LPs. So do you have this normal 80-20 structure where you distribute the carry, or you operate in different ways? If not, have you seen any other ways in which funds in the US are operating?
No, we're a traditional 2 and 20 model. We see evergreen funds. So we see some funds that are growing without a term. I think that the demand of capital, I think it's a beautiful idea, especially for emerging markets where things might take a little longer. But the amount of capital that has appetite for a non-closed-end fund is still, I think, a little limited. So, but we do see revenue-based models. So we see a lot of innovation happening. I think back to the member we talked about the bulk of the capital. Where's the capital going? Unfortunately, the bulk of the capital goes in the traditional closed-end fund 2 and 20 model. So I think the bulk of the capital still is in the old school way, but we see a lot of innovation, and it's exciting.
Understood. And lastly, just so that the founders hearing get a sense of how to apply to Quona and what kind of stage do you come at, what check sizes do you offer?
So we're early venture fund, early growth stage. So we do C to Series A as our sweet spot. We'll go up to Series B occasionally as well. We have an opportunity fund where we do follow-on investment. Our check size is typically in the kind of 2 to 5 million initial check. We can write smaller checks. We do toeholds like as low as 500,000 or less. So again, we have a sort of a decent range, but our sweet spot is C to Series A. We'll say 1 or 2 to 5 million, and we have offices and feet on the ground in all of our core markets. So feet on the ground in Bangalore, in Sao Paulo, in Cape Town, Lagos, Mexico City, Jakarta, Nairobi, and most recent is Dubai, Cairo. He's the person who splits his time between UAE and Egypt. So we're very much a local fund, and we really want to cultivate local ecosystems.
Got it. And one more question that just struck my mind was that what's your leadership style like? Because you've been leading teams since many years in different parts of different companies, and now that you're on your own, how do you hire people? What kind of culture do you build? And how do you promote? Because sometimes there's a lot of debate between age and experience and merit. If a person at the first year is good enough to beat a 5-year experienced professional, how do you really compensate them in that case? Because we do see a lot of cases coming up in that direction when younger and smarter generation people are getting more skilled and more smarter at doing what they do.
Yes. So our management style is it's very collaborative. Team and trust are two important values for us. So the way we live team first is a number of ways. One is the two other co-founders were all kind of equal managers. We basically so we make decisions openly, collectively. So there's a lot of transparency in how we run, which means we really create an owner culture. So we are very much meritocracy. We give people lots of latitude. We're very lean in how we're staffed. So we have a pretty small team for we have almost 750 million assets under management, and 28 people who manage that, and 28 people across the globe. Half of those are investment, half of them are kind of support. So those folks on the investment team have a lot of latitude to really to bring deals to us, to carry deals forward. And so it really does allow us to have more of a meritocracy because there's nowhere to hide, right? I mean, there's not, people at Quona, you really are bringing deals forward on a daily basis. So we're a very open, collaborative and owner culture. And that's how we manage. We try to, hire rock stars, empower them with the resources, and then give them a lot of room to run. So it's worked for us so far.
Do you also give shadow internships at your firm?
We do. We have every summer we hire interns, and actually now we're experimenting with bringing fellows on during the fall and spring. So we actually are expanding our internship. So again, we want to formalize that program. Right now it's informal and more ad hoc, but we're working on formalizing that. So always welcome great resumes from talented people.
Yeah, the reason I asked that was because we have a women community and they keep on looking for great experiences for internships. And now that you've said that y'all are open to it, I'll ask students to apply, and we are in the process of formalizing our offerings for women. But yeah, thanks a lot for your time. Really enjoyed speaking with you and hearing your experiences both with founders and building your own fund and writing your own book as well. But I'm sure that we will have a next session where we talk about different pitches, how do we story tell and how can you master that art once we get good audience from women entrepreneurs, and then we get ahead with it. I'll get in touch with you to conduct that session.
Beautiful, Radhika. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for your time.